Let's begin. Famine refers to non-availability of essential resources that leads to widespread death. That means loss of lives. Full stop. In the case of famines during British period, during British rule, essential resources primarily mean food materials. So here when we say famine during British, it is primarily non-availability of food materials. That is the definition of famine. I hope you understood. We'll learn about the causes behind recurring famines in colonial rule, during colonial rule in India. This has some elements that overlaps with disaster management. Basically, when you talk about resources, in general, I have to talk about certain qualities of or elements, parameters of resources that will impact its affluence. Here, learn about these parameters. There are basically 4 parameters. One is non-availability. Next is non-affordability. Next is non-accessibility. And finally, quality. For our purpose, we will consider these 2 elements only. But you need to remember these 4 qualities as well. Or suppose again, getting back to our discussion regarding the availability of tomatoes, right? When is the case you cannot have tomato, consume tomato? The consumption of tomatoes will be restricted by these 4 parameters. Number 1, suppose it is not available in the market. No matter how willing you are to pay for it, it is not at all available. You cannot have it. Next parameter is affordability. Tomato is suppose 50,000 rupees a kg. Now we are making an exaggerated form so that better understanding is there. In that case also you cannot consume, have it. Then is non-accessibility. Suppose there is a political means. You have to be a graduate to have tomato, and suppose you are in 10th standard, or suppose your age, or for that matter you have to prepare for civil services to have tomatoes. These restrictions are often political in nature or administrative in nature. These restrictions are often enforced. For example, during demonetization, you cannot have more than 4,000 rupees as cash from the automatic teller machine. These are certain restrictions. Then also the availability is restricted. Finally, quality. It is available, it is cheap, every other meeting all the 3 conditions, but all of them are rotten. Also then availability or it is restricted. You cannot have it. I hope you understand all the 4 parameters. For our discussion, we will consider these 2. Non-availability and non-affordability. Famines during the British rule happened primarily because of non-availability. That is, food is not available in the market. You can make it point number 1. Point number 2, non-affordability. It means lack of purchasing power leading to non-availability. That means it basically means non-availability. First, deal with the first point, that is non-availability. Put the heading, non-availability of food materials happened because, write down, happened because A, destruction of Indian agriculture because of faulty land revenue practices. Next point, commercialization of agriculture. You already can explain this point. That means food crops being replaced by cash crops. If you still cannot connect, you write down once again in the bracket. Food crops being replaced by cash crops. Next is black marketing and hoarding. Hoarding also means stockpiling that led to artificial hike in prices. I hope you also understand this point. Suppose there is already crisis of tomatoes. Coming back to tomatoes. If I have 5 metric tons of tomatoes at my warehouse and stock it for a while till the time it gets further escalated for my own benefit, it will also adversely impact the prices of tomatoes. Change the paragraph. Write down also important factors like lack of transportation facilities and also reluctance of the government. Reluctance or apathy, nonchalance, indifference, whatever you want to write, of the government. I hope you understood the point as well. Suppose even the government is willing, if there is no transportation facility, you cannot address the condition of a famine. Generally, famine, the impact is cyclic in nature. Suppose this is the area impacted by famine. There is food scarcity, it will impact the nearby pockets, something like this. That means there will also be food shortage here. If here is food shortage, it will escalate into further. So it is often a cyclic nature until and unless there is a place which bountiful production, massive production, if you carry it here, only then the condition will be addressed. Or else this will also be engulfed in the ambit of the famine. How to carry so much of goods? It is not possible in the medieval times or the ancient times. Only with advent of railways, also steamships, this became a reality. You can now bring in massive amount of goods and pump in the market. For suppose there is a food crisis in eastern India, Bengal, You bring in massive food from Myanmar. For example, right now, today's time, understand, there is crisis in tomato. There is a lot of food brought from elsewhere. There is a crisis in soybean oil or whatever that is, mustard oil. You can import. Wheat, we can export or import. Right. We'll look into non-affordability. Put the heading, non-affordability. Lack of purchasing power happened because a heavy burden of land revenue left little to no surplus at the pocket of the peasants. Full stop. Here it is important to note that the peasants constituted the majority of Indian population. Next point, the burden of other taxes such as income tax, municipality tax, etc. eroded the spending capacity of the masses. Right. Next point, other important factors may be decline of Indian handicrafts, overall drain of wealth, etc. Self-explanatory, there is no doubt, I suppose. The British famine policies in India. The British famine policies in India, this can be categorized into two parts. I will briefly explain. There is, the chances of a question being asked, it is rather less likely. I will explain this. British famine policies in India can be categorized into two parts. One is developments under company rule, that is mid 18th century till 1858. Here, the diagram will suffice. Even if there is a question, you will be able to answer. Under the crown rule, that is 1858 till 1947. Let us understand the developments under the company rule. Also marked by major famines. This can be explained as initial phase and later phase. This is initial phase. Company claimed no responsibility. Often intensified the situation by hoarding and black marketing. Rather than addressing it, they used to intensify. Also explain famine as an act of God, to let go of responsibilities. Please write it down. We'll look into the right portion first. First, you need to write here. Next is matured phase. I hope you have written. I'll write down. Matured phase, company became relatively responsible from the previous period. Company became relatively responsible, although no visible development in policies to tackle famine. Here, the relief work was carried out mostly by Christian missionaries, individual donors having altruistic motive. Also, here most of the works were not being done because of lack of understanding of famine. Here, majorly beneath that, write down less development because lack of understanding of famine, lack of scientific understanding of famine, lack of means of transportation. I am referring to railways. Also, apathy of company, etc. This is everything. You write it down. We will jump towards ground rule. Or what shifts do we notice during ground rule? Under ground rule, more sympathetic towards the plight of the masses. Naturally, crown rule, that means directly Indian subjects became the subject under the empire. Thereby, they were more responsible. That means here it is noted by more political and administrative responsibility. Also, better role played by press and media. Media, do not think media today is Ravish Kumar. No, just journalism, newspaper, print. For example, newspapers like Amrit Bazar Patrika. They became vocal during famines of 1878. They made the government responsible, made everybody aware. Amrit Bazar was particularly responsible, being vocal about that period. For example, Hindu Patriot. To an extent, examples had to be very accurate, but newspaper will take care of the issues. You are not wrong, but I do not know any particular article as such. I know about Amrit Bazar Patrika. Also, complexity of the problem changed because of advent of railways, steamships, connecting of international markets, scientific understanding of famine. Basically, when we say scientific understanding of famine, we understand about the Malthusian economics. It does not mean that during crown rule famines did not happen. It also happened there.